There we go. So, welcome, and I'm delighted to be interviewing two very good friends and colleagues, Mary Franklin-Smith and Sarah Parker, both of whom work with the NHS. And this conversation is really going to be about sharing the understanding called the three principles, or sometimes innate health, and sometimes lots of other things. People interested in sharing that in those kind of communities. And I know both of you have had a real journey with this over the past few years, challenges, difficulties, and huge successes. So I wanted to start by asking you kind of individually, I suppose, why do you want to share it in the NHS? And I guess I'd love you to start with what you saw as the benefits for you personally.
If I start, Kim, for me, this was something I came across via Mary, who was starting to think about sharing it in the NHS. I now work alongside Mary in an eating disorders team, but I previously had an eating disorder. I had anorexia for about 15 years. So Mary brought it to me with a view of how helpful did I think it might be, both as a human being, but also as somebody that had experienced anorexia. And for me, the simplicity of it stood out. It stood out because I think it's notoriously difficult to treat and to recover from eating disorders. And I think that goes without saying, but I think this simplifies such a lot. It offers an understanding, not a treatment, not a cure, but an understanding, and it's a gentle sort of sharing something. Here, have a look at this if you want to. And for me, that was one of the joys of it. And I think I could really see the benefit of its simplicity, because I think a lot of people who have an eating disorder get very caught up in a lot of thinking, a lot of complicated, well, if I do this, this means this, if I do that. And I think this kind of cuts through some of that stuff. And I think I could see it in action. Whilst I didn't have the vocabulary when I was unwell, one of the pivotal moment in terms of my recovery was somebody asking me if I'd ever considered counselling. And I laughed because I thought, well, I've had counselling for years. What do you mean? And she said to me, no, you becoming a counsellor. Now, at the time, the language I had that was me seeing something in me that I hadn't seen before. And I ran with it. And I started to see something that was more important to lose than keeping hold of my anorexia. But now I see that as actually she saw my health. She saw beyond the anorexia to my health and my well-being, and in turn helped me to see it. And for me, that's what this does. We're very good at focusing on fears around illness, and I think that's entirely necessary sometimes, but we're not very good at seeing a person's health and seeing their innate ability to thrive. And in my current life, that's something that I fall back on day in, day out. Whatever the struggles are, I know there's something in me that's carried me through every single day so far, and will carry on carrying me through. And that for me is what's so important about this understanding.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. How about you, Mary? Same question.
Can you repeat the question just so that I stay on?
It's kind of, I suppose I was wanting to understand why you so wanted to share it in the NHS, and to get there, maybe some of the things that you saw for yourself that have been huge benefits for you.
Okay. So why I want to share it in the NHS is because I think it brings something to the table in a way that we sometimes lack in some of the pathways and the treatments that we currently offer. and that's almost a sort of a way of being with a person, and a way of being with yourself and understanding yourself, that's, as Sarah has said, sort of cuts through lots of the detail, and keeps it simple. So for me, when I first came across this understanding, as you know, Kim, because I was with you at the time, and I'd really started to see something, what I saw was how my experience was being created in each moment and what was lying beneath that. So I saw the thought created reality thing, and I saw that underneath that there's a healthy, flourishing me. And those two things together blew something in my mind that I hadn't experienced before. And I'd done drama therapy training. I'd been working as a therapist for over 10 years in the NHS, and I hadn't understood it as clearly as I did when I came across this understanding. So I suppose that was the main thing for me, is I was like, I've studied this a lot, I've read lots of books, I've done a master's degree in it, I've been working in different mental health services, but it's this that has made it clear to me.
Right. So a kind of a clarity, but also some really important missing pieces that aren't always
Pointed out.
Yeah.
I think that's the thing, and it isn't that. I think that's the thing. It's like, it's pointing out what now to me seems really obvious, and for other people who haven't come across the understanding might seem really obvious already. But it's like, let's just give people an opportunity to hear this, just in case there's confusion, you know. And I think there is confusion. I think that's quite clear, that there is quite a lot of confusion about where people's experience is coming from, why they're feeling what they're feeling, and how resilient they are. And I think that those things are important to point out in a really sort of simple way. So that's why I'm keen to do it.
Yeah, brilliant, great. And you know, as we know, you don't have to be ill or even suffering to be confused about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Great. So tell me about, maybe we'll start with you, Mary, this time. Tell me about some of the difficulties and challenges that you had when you were kind of first attempting to share this, to live this in your work environment. And I'm thinking of things particularly like, you know, you are in a
MDT.
An organization that has a very a different paradigm at the moment. There's also the kind of spiritual nature of the understanding, I know, can seem quite scary to people at first. And also, you know, the whole language piece, you know, mind, consciousness, thought, can be a struggle. And of course, we're pointing to something here that is formless and invisible. But yeah, tell me what you struggled with, some of the difficulties for you.
Okay, yeah. Okay, so I think that the first thing that comes to mind when you say that is that when you start to hear this, if you've got a psychology background, or you've worked and trained in mental health, which everybody in our team, in our service has. So I think that's the first thing to say, is that I wasn't speaking to people who are working, say, in a business or even in education. I was working with people whose core business, core day-to-day job is to understand mental health and understand psychology.
Yeah.
So that everybody that I would speak to at work already had a framework for understanding where our experience is coming from. And if that's working for them and they feel that they're doing well, they feel happy, they feel that they're thriving, then they're not going to be looking for something new. You know, they're not perhaps going to be as open as other people might be to hearing something different, because they've already got their framework. Now, I've been guilty of that since coming across the principles, when someone's gone, oh, have you read this? And I'm like, oh, you know, and I've had to really work on that, because actually there could be stuff that, you know, we've got to stay open-minded, absolutely. So I suppose that's the first thing, is that you're trying to bring this into an NHS mental health service that has already sees it as their core business, because it is their core business to talk about mental health. And you're saying there's this thing. So I think that was one of the first struggles, is that people perhaps weren't innocently, they weren't like perhaps looking for anything, and therefore weren't as interested in the conversations as maybe I was, because I was looking and I was seeking at the time. That's the first thing. I suppose the other thing to say is that, and Sarah and I have just been talking about this, the NHS loves a framework and it loves evidence base. So I'm a trained drama therapist, and there is a bit of a lack of an evidence base for arts therapies, because in arts therapies, just to go off piece just for a second, we talk a lot about intuition, unconscious, the dream state, the dream world. We talk in metaphor, and it's quite hard to evidence the impact that working experientially has on a person. And the arts therapies therefore are still lacking in their evidence base. And I think that's quite similar for the principles, because it's, as we know, insight based. It's something that you feel, something that you see, not something that you learn. And that's hard to quantify, to write down and to get stats for. And so if you're trying to bring something new into the NHS, whatever that is, the questions you'll be asked is, what's the impact? What's the evidence base? And where does it fit into the framework?
Yeah, yeah.
And it was really hard for me to answer any of those questions, Kim.
Yeah.
Because at the time, 3 years ago, I knew what my experience was, and some of the other people that I'd met thought, well, that's not an evidence base in a way that would be respected. And I didn't know where it would fit in the framework. I've got thoughts on that now, but I certainly didn't have very clear thoughts on that at the time.
Yeah.
And because I was so passionate about it, it was a bit scary for people, to be honest, because I was like, and I've heard lots of people being interviewed about sharing the principles and sort of being a bit kind of evangelical about it at first, and that puts people off, I've learned.
Yeah.
It doesn't work. People just, it can freak people out, to be honest. So I think that those were my early struggles.
Mm-hmm. Great.
I think as well, in the NHS, we have separated spirituality with science, and the NHS has gone very much down the science route, and and that's absolutely appropriate in a lot of cases, but we've lost sight of the spirituality route, and I think it's really difficult to separate the two, but it's kind of happens in a lot of areas in the NHS. And so when you try and bring back that element of spirituality, people start to feel a little bit threatened by it, because it is unknown. It isn't fact as we can see in science. There isn't a right and a wrong. There isn't any proof of what that is. It's intangible. And I think that's quite difficult to bring back into the NHS. And I remember thinking, Kim, when I first spoke to Mary, the idea of, well, what is it that this other thing is? And I felt a bit like, well, I don't do spiritual stuff, not me, I don't do spiritual stuff. And so I felt a little, until I spoke to Mary and started to kind of understand in my own terms and my own phrases what that meant. Yeah. And I think it's not that it's threatening in itself, it's that we're not used to go in there anymore. We've separated off. The church does spirituality, the NHS does science, and actually we all live all of it all of the time. I
think it's one of our biggest challenges as a society, and is to see the marriage of those two things rather than the separation. Yeah.
But also just that word, even as you're saying that word now, spirituality, I'm thinking, oh, Sarah, don't say that word, because it's that word. It puts people back. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if people who are listening to this, who perhaps are a bit dubious, will listen to the word spirituality and kind of go, oh, that's not for me. I have no idea what they'll think, of course, but I sort of feel like I've learned that there's perhaps a way of talking about it that tries to use language, and we can't all do this, can we? We will never know how people respond, but stays away from some of the language that might make people just stop before they've even started. but at the same time has to acknowledge that we are talking about something that's unknown and a bit of a feeling and an experiential thing, and we don't want to get away from that because that's where the beauty is. So it's a sort of balance, I think.
And it's acknowledging as well that all of that stuff that we add to that word spirituality is thought. It's generated by our human beliefs, experiences. It's a word. Until we put meaning to it in our own ways, it isn't threatening, it's simply a word.
Yeah, and for me, it just, these days, it just means, spiritual just means formless. There's no form. And but I was the same right at the beginning. I had that same suspicion and mistrust and so while we're talking about language, I know in the NHS you kind of favoured calling it innate health, which I think is great. Is that true? And kind of talk about why you've done that. I mean, it makes sense to me.
Well, a bit like Sarah said in her, when you first started talking. So I think that it's about being really explicit that in a specialist mental health service, we want to talk about health. We want to talk about mental health. We want to talk about people's innate health. So to put that on the tin, if you like, just made sense. I think when you start talking, it can be that if you start talking about the 3 principles, you can get quite intellectual with it quite quickly. We work with people who a lot of people in our service are very highly intellectual and detail focused, as Sarah was saying. And so my thinking was let's try and move towards the kind of health, love, sharing, feeling in the room, atmosphere, emotion side of it, rather than there's these 3 principles. What do you think?
I think so, and I think there's something that only sounds a little bit prescriptive about, well, these are the 3 principles. This is it. This is what, and actually, I think innate health is a lot gentler, a lot more welcoming. And again, Kim, this is all just thought-driven stuff. It's the meaning that we attach to names. But I think it is really important to focus on health, because we've spent a lot of years in services focusing on ill health, and we've forgotten that there's health there as well. And I'm not saying stop focusing on ill health, but I'm saying let's just remember that there is health there as well, because that person still lives and still is alive and still is.
Brilliant. So tell me some of the things. So we talked about the difficulties and the challenges and, you know, in a sense, the hurdles that you've had to overcome over the past few years. What's worked in overcoming or resolving those? What have you done, or you know, that you would perhaps, for anybody trying to do the same thing, what would be your kind of best practice tips?
So the first thing that I was asked to do by our wonderful consultant at our service was to conduct a scoping review. So that was literally looking at all the current published peer-reviewed journals about this sharing, about this understanding, worldwide. So look for what has already been done and what's been written about what's been done, that's already out there. So that we can see, well, where are we coming on the story here? Because for me to say, which I was saying lots of, there's loads of stuff, just Google it, there's this website and this YouTube talk or this webinar, that wasn't what they were looking for. No. That didn't cut it. So it was like, what has been studied? So that was the first thing that we did, is we went to the library and had some help from the wonderful librarians at literally trawling all of the articles. And I think at the time there was 10, now there's 11 published articles that sort of stand up to it, if you like, about sharing this understanding in health services. So that was the first thing, is to sort of say to people, we are doing this properly, we're going through the right process.
Yeah.
Then we went to the research and development team and said, okay, we're keen to do a group with patients, and we went through a service evaluation framework, which was basically saying this is what our service is now, this is where we think it would fit in. We had to do consent forms, we had to do patient information sheets, we had to be clear about what it was that we were going to be doing in the group each week, which was an interesting process in itself. So we went through that whole process.
And I think it's on the surface a process that doesn't marry well with the idea of innate health. It is very much frameworked as a process, and I think it was really important in order to bring innate health into the NHS, it was really important to respect where the NHS is and bring innate health in via that way, rather than try and just barge in and change everything. It was really important to be respectful about what the NHS needs and sees as important in bringing new things in.
Yeah.
And we also did like service staff development sessions where we sort of presented sort of half-hour slots, didn't we, to the ward and to the community teams, kind of educating people about what we were going to be doing and why we were going to be doing it. So sharing it within the team, which isn't easy to do in a half-hour slot. Just the headlines, really.
And we got
from other conversations you and I have had specifically, Mary. I think I got the sense, correct me if I'm wrong, that actually there's been, like, you've noticed more overall impact through educating your colleagues actually than your patients. Would that be?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, so I think so. So we did that. We started the group. I don't know exactly the month now. September last year, and we did it for 10 weeks. And we can talk about the impact of that group and what we're going to do next. But yeah, absolutely, people got curious. We had leaflets on the walls kind of saying this is our innate health group. Everybody, the other staff in the service all knew what it was that we were doing. And Sarah and I are so passionate about it, and it kind of comes through in all of our conversations that there were people who were really curious and intrigued and looked into it for themselves, even if they'd only had like a 10-minute conversation with us. They might. It wasn't like we were constantly talking. We had other stuff to do, but people would be to look into it. I will say at this stage that there were staff who looked into it who found it tricky to understand, who felt put off by it, who felt confused by it. And there are still staff like that. So it's not, it's not like people have read it and then everybody's had this big, moment at all. And we're still having some interesting conversations about how people see it fits into their lives or their current understanding or their framework. But yeah, I think it's the conversations that happen, and they're not conversations about the understanding. No. They're conversations about relationships and about humans.
It's about sharing. When you share your experience of how we're living, how we're working, how it's just those everyday experiences that are a little bit different without having any labels, any kind of big whistles and bells, but things look a little bit different to you when you have this understanding, and so it's impossible not to share that. In just everyday conversations. You can be making a cup of tea, and there's something about the idea of thought created reality, or there's something about just bringing love to a situation. And it just permeates. It's a gentle, it's not here, have this, it's let's have a chat, and it comes in because that's how you see your experience.
And I think also like this, certainly for me, and I don't know, did I ever think that people couldn't recover? No, I don't think I didn't think people can recover, but I wasn't as sure as I am now that everybody can. And so I think that is something that we talk about in the office a lot. It's like everybody can recover from their eating disorder, but what you see in somebody with an eating disorder and what you talk about is not their health. It's, as you were saying, it's their illness. And it's a medical model. We talk about risk, we talk about health monitoring. So I think to bring this, it's almost like that's really important, and let's talk about their health. Let's have both conversations. I think that's been really, really key, hasn't it?
And I think I never stopped believing that anybody and everybody could recover. There were times when I didn't believe I could recover, but But in our work now, I don't ever believe that. But I do think there have been a lot of times when I've not recognized somebody's health. And this understanding helps me to speak to a different part when I'm speaking to other people.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
really...
And just, you know, importantly, I mean, it might sound obvious, but maybe not, because I think it's often overlooked. But you two, knowing you as I do a little bit, you know, you both bring such presence and, you know, deep listening and love to the conversations you're having, both with patients and your colleagues and everybody else. And I think that, you know, that goes such a long way. Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's not measurable, Kim, and that's the tricky thing.
I know.
Yeah.
So you've both been kind of trailblazers in this, and, you know, not just you, there are other people up and down the country doing a similar kind of thing, but you have been pioneers against, you know, what has been, I know, quite a lot of resistance at various times. What's kind of kept you going? And this may be a repetition of some of the things you said earlier, but what's kept you going? What's kept you so passionate and inspired by the possibilities of this?
For me, it's just as simple as knowing the value of this understanding, and knowing the value for me, which then clearly I'm not special in that it only applies to me. It's knowing the value that this can bring to other people, and I think it's that valuable that it would be wrong not to share it, and to keep kind of bringing that, and I don't always think everybody is going to get it straight away, or everybody is going to get all of it straight away, or anybody is going to acknowledge any of it straight away. But I do think it's really hard to have a conversation about this and not take even a tiny bit away. And for me, that's a win. That's a change. And it's about gently giving something and allowing whoever else is around to decide what they take from it. But it's a bit like putting a diamond in a box and never showing it to anybody. Why would you do that? So that for me is why.
Lovely. I would echo all of that, and I would say that there's something around the lack of fear. So I stopped being frightened of my experience after I came across this. It's not that I didn't have experiences, it's not that I didn't have anxiety, or I don't have anxiety, I don't feel the things I feel, but I'm not frightened of it. And there's of course there's stuff going on in all of our lives, good and bad and whatever, and there's stuff going on in my life, but I'm not frightened of it. And it was that, and I see a lot of fear in the people that I work with. They're frightened of feeling fear. And they're frightened of the things that they think, and they think that it means something about them as a person because they think certain things and they feel certain things. It was a conversation with Adam Ash, actually, and I remember him saying, if you can experience it as a human, then it's part of being a human.
Yeah.
It's nothing to try.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's that it's being able to bring something that might help somebody feel less frightened of being alive and what that means. And I can't think of anything else that I feel more passionate about than sharing something like that with people. I've said several times over the last 3 years, goodness me, if this was anything else, I'd just go, okay, it's fine. I'll do, you know. Yeah. Goodness, you know, Kim, because we've talked it through. But as you say, what diamond in a box, you just wouldn't want to hide that, and not because you think everybody's going to see it, but because you know that some people might, and that's worth it.
Absolutely.
I think as well, there's something about the conversation for me around coping, and I think we have lots of individual understanding around what coping means, and for me this has given me a framework to work with people to smash that almost and say coping's about getting through the day. it doesn't need to look pretty, it doesn't need to look anything. And I think that links in a bit with the idea of not fearing
the experience. Yeah, it's a game changer. Yeah,
it is, and it's about knowing that it's just surviving, and it is as simple as that. That's coping, that's getting through, and it takes away a lot of that drive to do things in a certain way or be things in a certain way. It brings everything down.
The other thing, Kim, is that it's not, and this is something that I normally start with when I do talk to people in a more formal capacity, and I know you do this on your workshops, as you say, it's not new. This is what's being shared here has been being shared forever and ever, and it's in all the books and all the teachings, and that I think is reassuring for people, because we're saying perhaps the way of sharing it might be new, and the 3 principles language is certainly in some ways new, but the message isn't new. And I think that's important. That's key too.
Yeah. Okay. Fun question. It's 2030. Tell me your hopes and dreams for the NHS, and maybe not. You can go broader than eating disorders. Go as broad as you like. How is the NHS different?
Whoa. I mean, for me, it goes without saying that I hope that this understanding has permeated.
Yeah.
Really, really hope it has, because I think it can be absolutely transformative. And I think it can be transformative in both a mental health setting, physical health settings. It can be transformative in terms of everybody's well-being, staff, patients. I think we are all doing the best we can with what we've got. And I think when we see that actually thriving isn't about being this way or getting the results in this way, or I think it brings our anxiety levels down, it brings our stress levels down, and I think that's really important to bring to a team of staff within the NHS that actually are all without doubt doing the best they can, but struggling to deliver a service that's a tricky service at the moment.
Yep. So 2013, NHS, less fear and less burnout in the whole NHS is what my vision would be.
And more acceptance, more love and acceptance. I think we're not very good at doing love and acceptance. We're very good at delivering results, getting results, reaching targets.
Well, are you?
Well, we're good at talking about
it. Yeah, the NHS is great at talking about targets, but actually what are targets about, because I'm not entirely sure they mean very much to anybody, least of all the people that are part of that target-driven culture. I think it's really tricky culture, and I think it's been done in with everybody's best interest at heart. But I think it creates an awful lot of difficult stuff. And I think if we can cut through that and bring in a lot more love and a lot more acceptance and a lot more kindness into the NHS, it can be a whole different place to be.
Yeah.
But I have that's beautiful. I have a client and friend who's a GP, well, several of them, but he was telling me that typically 80 to 85% of the people in his surgery are there with mental health difficulties, and he suspects another 10% that's what's really going on. So I mean, I just think about the freeing up of resources,
Yeah,
absolutely. We talked about that earlier today.
Yeah.
And I think that a lack of confusion about where experience is coming from would go a long way for that, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And the thing is that there's so many wonderful staff. I will say this, in our service we have amazing clinical leads in our team, without whom we wouldn't be sat here today talking about the progress we've made over the 3 years, because they've Dr. Jones, Dr. Shell
Yeah.
have, just the two of them, have really been very strategic and helpful and loving, and you know, in our process. So we have some amazing staff in our NHS, and there's a lot of work to get through, and a lot of systems that we've created that take a lot of time. So I would hope that also 2013 there'd be perhaps a few less flowcharts. And Excel spreadsheets. That's just me.
Yeah.
Bit more freedom, you know.
That's brilliant. So is there anything else you think it's important to say that you haven't said yet? You know, like if you had the leaders, the top leaders of the NHS watching this, what would you want to say to them?
Can I just say, Kim, what's happening next?
Yeah, please.
Service first, which is we have plans to offer a 2-day experiential Free Principles Innate Health event in-house for the whole service, for the whole staff group.
Brilliant.
We have plans to think about rolling out more days or groups, or we haven't quite firmed up whether it'll be another weekly group, because that wasn't as successful as we thought it would be, or but more stuff for the patients. And we're planning to write this up in a paper that we hope to be published, so that there'll be 12 papers. So I just wanted to say that. And also one of the things that's happening in our trust in Leeds and York is that I'm going to be delivering a sort of training to the SAS group, which is Specialty Associate Doctors in the trust, who perhaps work across different, will do work in different parts of the trust, and that's going to be a 1-day event in December. So I just sort of wanted to say that we've got plans for things moving forward, which is awesome. And if we had the top NHS people sat here listening, what would we say?
I think there's something really important about sharing personal experience, because at the moment there's evidence for ourselves of how it's helped. But I think it's about being open to something new, not with any preconceived ideas, but being open to something, to let something new in and see where it goes. I would say that if I spoke personally, I have experienced the difference that this understanding has made on a professional level and a personal level. And I'd say, let's see what happens. Let's see. I think without doubt, when we've shared it in the group, it's probably fair to say we haven't had the results necessarily on paper that we'd hoped for. But I think when you see the feedback, you see the impact of this. So, you know, quantitatively, but qualitatively, it really, some of the feedback has been phenomenal, both from carers and from patients. And I'd say, let's look at that. Let's see where this can go.
You see, the other thing to add to that is that we tried to fit it into a current system by doing it in a 90-minute group every week, because that's what we do. We do hour or an hour and a half session once a week. And where we're moving towards is, okay, and this isn't just in innate health sharing, there's other parts of therapies in the NHS that are saying maybe it's different from that. Maybe we need to gather people together for 2 or 3 days. And there's other things happening in eating disorder services that are noticing the impact of taking people out of their day-to-day life. So that they've got a space to hear something new. So I'd say to the top NHS bosses, let's be really open-minded to what might be new, what might be fresh, and what might be different about what we're already doing.
And be creative.
Because why not? You know, we've got
absolutely.
It's not like we haven't got improvements that we could make.
Yeah, fabulous.
And I think it's really important, Kim, to say we're not saying let's do away with everything else. We're saying let's bring this in too. I think that's the thing. We're not here to say nothing else is as good as this, or nothing else works, or nothing, because when you're working with so many individuals in the system, there will be different bits that resonate with different people of all different sorts of approaches, and that's okay. For me, it's really important to bring this approach in too.
Yeah, we've talked about, if we were to get to the point of doing a formal piece of research and maybe a randomized controlled trial type piece of research, which is where you sort of gather, so let's say 50 people and say, right, you 25 are going to have CBT and you 25 are going to have IPT, and see the results. One of my ideas was that what we would do is we would do that by sharing the understanding with the staff who are going to deliver CBT.
Right, yeah.
So that it's not that people are going to be explicitly sharing the principles, it's just that the way that they'll deliver what they're already doing, their current evidence-based treatment might be different, and that I'm really intrigued by that.
Yeah, that's fabulous. And as you said at the beginning, this is not an approach. It's not a treatment.
No.
And I think that's where people can get confused, because you're kind of comparing. You're not comparing apples and apples.
No.
Excellent. Well, I wish you both every success, and absolutely delighted to hear about how far you've come already. And you know my passion for sharing this understanding, and it's so wonderful when people are really taking it out there into the world. So thank you so much, Mary and Sarah.
Yeah, so Kim, can I just say thanks to you at the end of this interview, because we've both been on several of your retreats and spent lots of times talking to you. You've mentored us through this, and so I think it's important to sort of put that at the end of this interview, that if it wasn't for your generosity and love, we also wouldn't be sat here. So I just want to sort of put that out there, because big up to you, Kim. You're amazing.
Absolutely big up to you, Kim. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to stop recording there. And